A gaming PC for $100, is that even possible? Yes, it is. The question is only, what do you expect of a $100 gaming PC? Probably not much, but it might surprise you what games I can play on my newly built, with used parts then, $100 gaming PC. And yeah, I have to admit something, it's not exactly $100, it's $110. I'm such a liar, I'm very sorry. But yeah, for $110, I'll show you what I've got for that kind of money. I got inspired to do this by the Scrapyard Wars by Linustechtips. Perhaps you know that channel, and probably if you have something with PC hardware, you know his channel. What this series was all about was a bunch of guys who were trying to build an ultimate gaming PC for $500, but I did decide to do it with a little bit less, 5 times less, $100. Or in my case then $110. But anyway, let's see, if you're not really familiar, which parts we really need to build a gaming PC. First of all, we need a motherboard where everything needs to be placed on. Pretty much every part we're going to need is either placed on the motherboard or connected or attached to the motherboard. So, the most important part. Then also very important, we are going to need a CPU, a central processing unit. It is going to do all of our calculations and is the brain of the PC. The CPU is getting very hot, that means we need a CPU cooler as well. We're also definitely going to need some memory. Random access memory, in short RAM. Everything needs to be fed with power, and for that we also going to need a power supply unit. For good cooling, airflow, and just to make sure everything is installed securely and safe, we're also going to need a PC case, of course. Also needed for Windows and our games is a hard disk drive or an SSD, but for that price we probably are going for the hard disk drive. And then last but definitely not least, a GPU, a video card. We're going to need a good one for gaming, good as far as $110 go, but yeah, we're going to need definitely one for gaming. So I know what you're thinking, how is that possible for $110? It's not easy, definitely not, but I used some tricks and I'm going to show you that right now. So welcome to the biggest marketplace website here in my country, the Netherlands, marktplaats.nl. It literally means marketplace, so yeah, there you have it. Here on this site, people trade anything. Cars, car parts, furniture, music, CDs, and also computer parts. It's absolutely the website that everyone is using. It's like the Facebook in trading here in my country. The good thing is that people sometimes either have no idea what things are worth, so computer parts can be bought pretty cheap, but sometimes also people just want to clean their stuff up, and there's so much parts that are being offered that people just lower their prices just to make sure they can rid of their old stuff. However, 2 things that we really need to take in consideration is that in the United States the prices for used parts seems to be a little bit cheaper than here in Europe. And also, of course, now with all the Bitcoin mining machines, GPUs in general are also more expensive. So that makes our quest for the $100, $110 PC a little bit harder. My budget was so tight that I saw no other option than just to buy a pre-built PC and a separate GPU, because else individual parts were just way too much money and it would always exceed $100. Then on a day I saw an ad from someone who was living 10 minutes away driving for me, and he offered a HP 6200 Pro system. The good thing about a pre-assembled system like this, that it's got everything: motherboard, CPU, CPU cooler, power supply unit, case, hard disk drive, everything except a GPU. The person was asking around $80, 80 euros. But I managed to get the price around 60, and eventually I paid 60 for the case with everything in it. And the specs of the system, what does it contain? The CPU is an Intel G850 clocked at 3.20 GHz, and the G850 is not really a familiar processor, but it's a little bit comparable between the second generation Intel i3 and Intel i5. So with the clock speed, it's doing okay for gaming. It's not the older Core 2 Quad, you know, it's newer, and yeah, it's a pretty good CPU. Then it also has 4 gigabytes of RAM, and it comes with a 250 gigabytes hard disk drive, but it is a pretty fast one with 16 megabyte cache and 7200 RPM. And as far as a hard disk drive goes, that's pretty much one of the fastest. It also comes with the power supply unit and the case itself, so everything is pretty much ready. And yeah, also Windows 10 was pre-installed, so that's also a good thing. I could just connect the computer and everything was done. The only bad thing is that the CPU cooler was a passive cooler and it was connected to a case fan, so it was not ideal, and overclocking and all would never be possible with this cooling, but it's okay for that price. The only thing that was missing was a GPU, a graphics card. So I looked for a graphics card and I saw an advertisement from someone who was selling his GT 1030 for around $50. Normally the price for that card is new, around $80-90 I think, which is not really expensive as well, but $50 for a pretty okay-ish GPU was just fine. I also really had to stick to a small form factor graphics card because I just cannot place a full-size graphics card in this small case, and even if I want to build everything over in a full ATX case, the size of the motherboard is really weird. It's not just a regular ATX, and everything was also tightened with Torx screws, so I just wanted to leave everything inside the case, and I just placed the GTX 1030 in there. There were only 2 small problems. The first one was that the 1030 was a little bit too high. That meant that the top cover could not be put back onto the case, and yeah, the case has to stay like this for now. And the other disadvantage was that, first of all, when I did place the 1030, the PCI slots, the brackets, they got in the way of the HDMI port. And for that I had to completely break out the entire structure of the protective PCI card board, so it looks a little bit like this, as you can see here. So in total $60 for the PC, the case with everything in it, and $50 for the GPU, the graphics card. That makes a total of $110, $10 more than the $100 that I was aiming for, but I think it's okay. But enough talk, let's finally go to the benchmarks. Okay, one thing you should know before we start with the benchmarks is that I could not record directly from the $110 game PC with NVIDIA Shadowplay. The reason for that was that the GT 1030 does not belong to the GTX family, which supports Shadowplay. So that means what you're seeing right now, all the game footage is from my own PC, which is a very strong PC with a GTX 1080. So it has all highest settings possible, and it's not really representative for the image quality of the $110 PC. But you have to trust the benchmarks for me and how it looks and what settings to run. So let's first start with some esports game. StarCraft II, as you see here, on 1080p with high settings has no problem whatsoever with the FPS. It has an average FPS of 110, a minimum FPS of 4, and a maximum FPS of 125. And the minimum FPS is, I think, because I maybe accidentally entered a pause menu, I don't know. But yeah, on high settings on 1080p, we are absolutely reaching the 60 FPS count, which is what we are aiming for. So yeah, I don't have to test the medium settings for StarCraft II. I think the figure pretty much speaks for itself. So yeah, no problem, StarCraft 2. So let's continue with the next esports game, and that is Overwatch. Back from 2016, but absolutely still one of the most popular esports games. It is an esports game, but it has some nice graphics quality if you crank up some of the options for video. And I did test it with 2 different settings, high settings and medium settings. And let's start with the high settings to see what kind of FPS we have. And it is on high settings, 2x anti-aliasing and ambient occlusion. We have an average FPS of 55, a minimum FPS of 44, and a maximum FPS of 67. Well, 55 looks good as average. We are reaching the 60 FPS limit on average, but as you can see, the minimum FPS is 44. And why is that important? It's because when spaces are getting crowded with more players, because sometimes you have a 5 against 5 player situation, you definitely don't want to drop below 60 FPS because these moments are critical for a match. You really want to stay around 60 FPS, and for that I don't recommend putting on high settings for Overwatch because it is an esports game and you definitely want to have constant 60 FPS. So let's see what happens if we set medium settings then. That means no anti-aliasing, no ambient occlusion. We have average FPS of 95, minimum FPS of 74 and maximum of 117. That looks a lot better. That means we can be guaranteed with the minimum FPS of 74 that we have constant 60 FPS. And again, with an esports game like Overwatch, that's what you really want. So if you have a 1030 or you're planning to buy one, I suggest you put it on medium settings or tweak the settings a little bit to see that you have at least 60 FPS. The next biggest esports game still is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. There was one problem here, and that was Windows 10 Game DVR, the in-game recording tool from Microsoft in Windows 10. And it seems I could not turn it off. I tried everything in regedit and for some reason I just couldn't get it off, and it seems to have a big impact on CSGO. So that's why I got these weird frame rates, 53 average, 41 minimum and 66 maximum. But yeah, my GT 1030 should do way better than 53 average because when I switched to medium and high, there was almost no difference, and that was really weird, of course. And yeah, it's just being bottlenecked by Windows 10 Game DVR. So unfortunately, I could not do a correct benchmark for this, but I'm pretty sure that CSGO should have no problems with having constant 60 FPS. Then let's try out some more demanding single-player games. You see Skyrim Special Edition here, and it's not the regular one, it's my super modded version. And yeah, that's because again I could not record original footage from my $110 PC, so that's the reason why you see this footage. So Skyrim Special Edition and Fallout 4, I think they are pretty much the same when it comes to demanding from your hardware. So let's see the benchmarks for Skyrim Special Edition. First, let's see the high settings. So high settings with Skyrim Special Edition, it has FXAA and ambient occlusion on as well. And yeah, the FPS count average is 40, the minimum is 12 and the maximum is 61. And that's okay, the game ran okay, no real problems, not constant 60 FPS. This is measured with indoor locations, outdoor locations, crowded locations with multiple characters. And yeah, it does very good on indoor locations. That was almost 60 FPS. Because an indoor you don't have to load a skybox, you don't have to load grass, outdoor areas, etc. And yeah, on crowded areas sometimes it dropped to 30, I have to admit that. But overall it's okay and high. You can run it fine. It's a single player game. You don't need the reflexes and the constant 60 FPS that you might need on a esports game. So yeah, it's okay, it's playable on high. So let's see what the FPS then is on medium. The funny thing is, medium settings don't even improve the FPS too much, only with 3 or something. Only the minimum FPS is a bit higher. So 43 on average, 23 on minimum and 63 on maximum. And I'm not really sure what is causing this. Maybe something is bottlenecking the medium settings or the high settings or something. I'm not really sure. Maybe the CPU is just too slow, maybe the RAM is just too less, or maybe the GT 1030 is just not strong enough to make a real difference between medium and high settings. But yeah, anyway, so you can see you can better just leave it on high settings since the FPS difference is only 3 or something. That's not really worth it. So yeah, you can play Skyrim Special Edition on high settings, but keep in mind you have probably 30 to 40 FPS in outdoor areas and 60 plus on indoor. So Skyrim Special Edition and Fallout 4, you can handle them on this GT 1030. And then a game that really brings the GT 1030 to its knees, GTA 5. I did start with high settings, but yeah, it was just way too much for the GT 1030. It was all the way 30 FPS or lower, so I had to set everything on normal and no ambient occlusion, no anisotrophic filtering, no special effects, no FXAA, just the normal settings, which are actually low settings, but there are no low settings. So for that, yeah, just normal settings. Starting with full HD normal settings, let's see how it runs. Oh, and by the way, these are of course from my modded version of GTA 5, not a regular version. But anyway, the benchmarks for the regular 1080p settings. The benchmarks are 38 FPS on average, 8 FPS minimum, and 61 maximum. It might be true that this is it, but yeah, the game suffers from a lot of bad stutters, and one thing you don't see in these benchmarks is, what I've noticed is that the game has incredibly much trouble keeping up with loading all the textures in time, and this can be especially seen when you're driving really fast, that the game has some problems really holding up with textural loading. And yeah, this is really disturbing, and I had to tweak a little bit with the settings, with the sliders for density, and it became a little bit better. But yeah, it's not ideal, and the game really struggles on the 1030 to have constant smooth gameplay. So maybe that changes when we use a little bit lower resolution for the first time. So we go to 1680 by 1050, also a medium settings. We can't go any lower, that's pretty bad. But yeah, also here in this case, the same way as Skyrim Special Edition, not really much improvement except for the minimum FPS. 39 average, 23 minimum, and 61 maximum. Pretty much the maximum was the same as on the 1080p version. So that's weird, and it seems it's also being bottlenecked, either the medium or the high settings, by either the CPU, either by the RAM, or the GT 1030 itself. I'm not really sure about that. But yeah, even lowering the resolution didn't really had a lot of influence. I had to say the game loaded a little bit better, and the experience overall was a little bit better, but it's not really the GTA 5 experience that you want to have. Then I even suggest more that you play it on the console for the graphics, because what you had now with this medium settings, pretty much a advanced GTA 4 graphics engine. You know, it wasn't really the GTA 5 graphics that you know on PC, so not really recommended for the 1030 to run GTA 5. So, my verdict, this $100, this $110 gaming PC, what do I think about it? For the price, it's good actually, it's pretty good. The GT 1030 has no problem with any esport games, and you can even play some single player games like Skyrim Special Edition and Fallout 4 without losing too much FPS. But higher demanding games like The Witcher 3 and GTA 5 really struggle, the PC really struggles to let them run fine. So don't have too much high hopes. But for the rest, yeah, for $110 it's fine. Very good for an esports PC, for an esports gaming PC, you know, it's doing pretty okay. The only thing that really bothered me was the mechanical hard drive. It's one of the faster mechanical hard drives, but the loading times, the installation times and all, it took so long. I almost took 2.5 days to install everything and run the benchmarks. And I think if I had an SSD, I probably would have done it in half a day. So yeah, that's really a big difference. So do I recommend it? Sure. Check out your computer parts vendor website, or at least websites who sell secondhand computer parts, and try to build something for yourself. And yeah, with that we come to the end of this video, and I hope you guys liked it, and yeah, hopefully see you guys at the next video. So take care and bye bye.